Hello and welcome to Africa 360. I'm your host, Kwangu Liwewe. The United Kingdom reacted with shock at the news that the ISIS terrorist seen beheading hostages in gruesome YouTube videos is in fact a British national. Jihadi John, as he's known, is among a growing group of westernized educated youth who leave Europe to join the Islamic State war in Iraq and Syria. This week on Africa 360, we look at how this trend plays out in Africa. What are some of the factors driving the radicalization and recruitment of youth into extremist Islamist groups on the continent? Our senior producer, Lindy Montogana, takes a look. "10,000 kilometers away from the front line, and social media is all Mohammed needs to stay connected to the ISIS battle in Syria.
No matter what I do, I go on the internet and get the update what is happening on the ground, especially in Syria and
WhatsApp groups and Facebook pages are meeting grounds for like-minded youth around the world. The content is often gruesome.
I see the suffering of my Muslim brothers and sisters, the killing of the children, innocent people, and women being raped by soldiers. I pray for them that God must give them victory and make them strong.
Men like Mohammed are at the center of an important global discussion as young, seemingly moderate Muslims become radicalized and join extremist groups.
You now have 72 hours to pressure your government in making a wise decision by paying the 200 million to save the lives of your citizens. Otherwise, this knife will become your nightmare.
Jihadi John, 3 British schoolgirls, a South African man, an Australian teenager. They're all believed to have joined ISIS in just the past few months. The trend in Africa is similar. Al-Shabaab actively targets youth recruits, with the majority of new members aged between 15 and 19 years old. According to research, some are motivated by money, most by religious conviction, but almost all feel politically marginalized. Furthermore, the heavy-handed and discriminatory response to terrorism by security forces has only further fueled radicalization among Muslim youth.
It's the worst thing you can do. In effect, you have a short-term solution, but that short-term solution often leads to a long-term consequence. A long-term consequence in this form is that you might deal with one person, but it's creating 100, 200 others to take its place.
As US-led forces continue to launch airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, young men like Mohammed watch with a passionate intensity, and they don't like what they see.
It makes me feel that I have to go and help my Muslim brothers and sisters and go and fight.
Lindy Montogana, Johannesburg.
The young man in the insert you've just seen, who asked to be referred to only as Mohammed, sat down with me briefly. He spoke to me about his beliefs and thoughts on extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Shabaab. Here's that conversation. Now, Mohammed, many people around the world refer to groups such as ISIS, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab as terrorist groups. Do you buy into this? Are they actually terrorist groups?
I know, as Muslims, we are not terrorists. For example, I'll give you an example. When Prophet Muhammad, our prophet, the last prophet, migrated from Mecca to Medina, the first thing that he established in Medina, it was Islamic State, Sharia law. So we don't have Sharia law. So what we're saying is, why when we want to create Sharia law and have our own state, and then people have problem? So now, ISIS, it has been a while. ISIS came up, wanted to create Sharia law, and we're supporting them because we want a Sharia law. And it has been a while, Muslim, we didn't have a leader. We call it the Khalifa, who's going to come and implement Islamic law, Sharia.
Now, just focusing on that, who exactly is an enemy to Islam?
In fact, we don't have an enemy. If people, like, for example, the people who are not Muslims, they are not our enemies. Muslims, what we want to establish Sharia.
Through war?
No, not with war. So now, for example, how Al-Shabaab was formed. I'll take an example in Africa, how Shabaab was formed. Al-Shabaab was formed, they wanted to establish Sharia law because this is what we believe. This is our constitution. Quran is our constitution.
Okay.
So, and then people, they start fighting the Sharia law. And then this is where the war started. And we wouldn't sit back like those Muslim brothers and sisters in Ethiopia and Somalia and say, no, okay, we let it go just like that. But the problem was they wanted to follow the Quran. That is our guidance. And this is where our Sharia comes from.
Would you join ISIS?
Yes, if the chance prevail, I'll join ISIS.
And why is that so that you would join ISIS if you're given the chance?
The reason is one. I want to help my brothers to establish Islamic State.
What's stopping you from going to join them?
Well, now, I don't know, but if, as I said before, if the chance prevail, I'll go.
How far would you go in terms of doing what they believe in terms of executing what they ask you to do? For instance, would you be a suicide bomber?
On that one, I cannot dwell on it because even the scholars of Islam, they're still debating on that one, the suicide bombing, if it is allowed or... But others say, agree that, okay, you can be a suicide bomber. What
do you think? Your personal view. Could you take up that challenge?
Yes, I will.
Some of your peers who are not Muslims would think or say that you've been brainwashed. How do you respond to this?
Oh, well, let them think whatever they want to think. But and there's something that I need to make it clear. Going for jihad, it's not what people think. It's all what Allah wants from us. Because jihad is there. We cannot deny it. And all over the world, Muslims, they know that jihad is there. So if they say I'm brainwashed, maybe they will say also, maybe I'm coming from the poor background. I'm not coming from the poor background. I'm not depressed, I'm not stressed, I'm normal, I'm okay, I'm doing well in life. And I just want to serve the cause to establish Islamic State. That I'm not brainwashed, I'm normal, I'm okay, I'm clear, everything is okay.
When we look at South Africa, are there a lot of, or quite a number of people who sympathize with ISIS?
I believe so they are, although they cannot come up, because of maybe security reason, whatever the case may be. But what we're saying also, we are not terrorists, and I'm not linked with them. It's just the feeling that I have. If should the chance came up, I'll go.
Thank you very much, Mohammed.
Thank you.
Well, coming up after the break, we're in conversation with Dr. Aneli Botha, who has done a lot of research on this issue. And later, I'll be joined in the studio by respected Imam Maulana Ibrahim Bam, as well as well-known South African academic Naeem Jena. Don't go away.
When people go through such a situation where they see such great amount of loss of life, sometimes their own near and dear ones being killed in front of them, that does create the right type of situation for such extremist groups to exist.
Welcome back to Africa 360. Dr. Annalie Botha from the Institute of Security Studies has done a lot of research on the radicalization and recruitment of Kenyan and Somali youth into organizations like Al-Shabaab. Well, she joins me now via Skype from Uganda. Dr. Botha, thank you very much for taking your time to speak to us. Your research has specifically looked at Al-Shabaab and the Mombasa Republican Council. But what strikes me in your research is that the majority of new recruits are between the ages of 15 and 19. Why are they so young?
The issue is that younger people are simply just more susceptible to the ideas of others. They haven't formed their personalities really yet. They don't. The influence of friends play a very, very important role. And that is what makes basically contribute to especially young people being extremely vulnerable. Also with that is patience is not a virtue when it comes to the younger generation. They want to see changes, and they want to see changes quickly. So all of these factors, I think, play a very, very important role.
Dr. Botha, can you describe for us the political and social conditions that create an environment conducive to terrorism and youth recruitment?
Well, there is not only one particular reason. What was interesting is that socioeconomic circumstances, and especially poverty, did not play a role at all in the case of Kenya. It did play a role in people joining Al-Shabaab in Somalia. But what is interesting overall is that radicalization is driven by two basic concepts. The first one is marginalization, and it can be ethnical, can be religious, and that leads to frustration. And if there's no outlet in the sense of people are going to listen to me, the next best thing, unfortunately, is to turn to violence. Especially if you not only feel that yourself feel that way, but also a group of friends also agree with you. So there's not one single factor that plays a role. But you also have to keep in mind how people were introduced to, for example, Al-Shabaab. And the majority of them, especially in the case of Kenya, the role of religious leaders play a very important role, as well as friends. So it's those type of factors, I think, that we have to take into consideration when you develop a counter strategy to address those issues as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Botha. Well, joining me now in studio is Maulana Ibrahim Bam. He is the Imam of one of the biggest Muslim congregations in Johannesburg. Also with me is respected academic Naeem Jenna, who is the executive director of the think tank, the Afro-Middle East Center. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Naeem, I'll start with you. When you look at groups like ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, just how Islamic are these groups?
Well, I suppose that depends on who you ask. I mean, they would argue that certainly ISIS has developed very sophisticated argumentation to claim that their actions are very Islamic, that they're following the Quran, etc. Generally, their arguments fall within very kind of marginal opinion within Islamic theology and not within the mainstream. And then they also resuscitate things that have long passed. So, for example, they would claim that slavery is Islamic. No one else in the world really accepts that anymore. So, yeah, from their perspective, they would argue that and they have scholars that would argue that their positions are Islamic, but the rest of the Muslim world doesn't accept that.
Maulana, maybe you can come in here and just tell us, groups like these, are they misinterpreting Islam and the Quran?
One of the aspects that I would say, yes, they are misinterpreting various aspects of the Quran, but also they don't emerge out of a vacuum. There is a vacuum which, for whatever reason, they have been able to exploit. And there have been various aspects that have created that vacuum, which people have to take that into account to understand why they have become popular and why they exist.
Just be more specific and tell us about this
for
vacuum.
Example, we all know that what is happening in many countries in the world, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. We know that unjust wars have come about. There have been oppression. There have been foreign occupation. There have been wars that have been waged on false pretenses. Now, when people go through such a situation, where they see such great amount of loss of life, sometimes their own near and dear ones being killed in front of them, that does create the right type of situation for such extremist groups to exist.
Now, how do you curb that? Is there any way you could possibly curb that?
Well, yeah, I think as with many of these cases, whether you talk about ISIS or Boko Haram, another good example, Shabaab, really the way to deal with terrorist activity is to deal with root causes, not to deal with symptoms and not to deal with the activities themselves. In the case of Boko Haram, for example, Boko Haram is able to thrive in the northern part of Nigeria because the bulk of the population there feels more marginalized. They feel alienated from the resources of the country and all kinds of things, and so they allow such groups to thrive in those areas. Now, the way to deal with it is fine, you know, there might be a military option, but the way to deal with it in a sustainable way is to address those root causes. Why do people feel marginalized? What are the socioeconomic conditions that allow that to happen? And then to address those and redress those problems. So similarly with ISIS, for example, and the kind of thing that Maulana Bam mentions, at the heart of it, and the reason why many of the recruits to ISIS actually join the group, is they feel that there is an imperialist onslaught on the third world in general and the Muslim world in particular, and that ISIS is really the only group from their perspective that is standing up to the West. Now, we can argue that. I mean, I don't agree with that analysis, right? I think that ISIS has really killed more Muslims than Westerners. But the point is that you have a situation where you have a powerful superpower that moves into countries, takes over political and civil society at will in order to serve its interests. And when people are fed up with that, they grasp at any straw that they feel will be able to confront that imperial threat, if you like. And in this case, ISIS seems to be that for some people.
Maulana, maybe you can come in here. Let's talk about the creation of an Islamic State or a caliphate, as it's called. When it comes to Islam, where does this fall in?
Well, we see the Khilafat is something that started off from the beginning and inception of Islam. It's a very noble concept, a concept of which government is based on truth, justice, or honesty, integrity, all of those particular aspects. Now, there was an ideal situation of the Khilafat in the time of the early stages of Islam, and because of it being such an ideal, people have always aspired to an ideal, and there's nothing wrong for human society always to aspire towards an ideal. The Khilafat, as it was known, and up till now you will find Muslim scholars talking very highly about the Khilafat. Whether in today modern times there are people who will be able to live up and to aspire to that ideal is a different matter. But human beings being human beings, they've always would aspire towards an ideal.
But realistically, can such a thing be achieved?
I don't think so. Not in the world that we live in today. But I think that this is actually a very good example of how ISIS, for example, uses classical Islamic discourse and manipulates it in order to make a case and grant themselves theological or religious legitimacy. And there's no legitimacy in Baghdadi, the ISIS head, claiming to be the caliph. He really self-appointed, although he claims that he has a council that has appointed him. But he uses the classical discourse in a manipulated way to give that legitimacy. And again, there are people who then fall for that because it sounds like the ideal, as Maulana Baba said, the ideal has been realized, without interrogating who is the idiot that's making the claim. But it sounds like an ideal has been realized, so therefore you have to now pledge your allegiance to him, etc. But it's, as I say, it's an indication of how they, in a very sophisticated way, use classical theological concepts to make themselves legitimate.
Just hold on to that thought, and our conversation continues after the break. Don't go away.
If you continue to have European powers and the United States, etc., supporting autocratic and dictatorial governments, then you're going to have to face the violent response that comes with it, unfortunately.
Welcome back to Africa 360, and I'm still in conversation with Maulana Ibrahim Bam and Naheem Jena. Maulana, now how are you dealing with this in the mosques in terms of the radicalization of the youth?
Well, we first have to understand the root causes, and of course we know that many times radicalism emanates from idealism. Youth, by and large, throughout history, we see it in South Africa, we see it in the Soweto uprising, youth have a sense of idealism. They always look towards aspects, and then they see and they feel demoralized and disillusioned by community, society, role models, leaders, not living up by the ideals with which they are supposed to live by. And youth see these type of double standards. They see the aspect of throughout the world, people talking about democracy, but then at the end of the day, they also at the same time are propping up autocratic regimes elsewhere. They speak about freedom, but yet at the same time they're trampling upon the civil liberties of people abroad. People see all these type of things, and by and large you'll find even our own country, we find that in the form of EFF, you'll find youth find that the transformative policies are not good enough. They feel that the rhetoric and the sloganeering are something that does not change society as a whole. So we have to understand the reasons behind it and then address those reasons, but yet at the same time also tell people to be pragmatic. From the mosque, we have always tried to preach the aspect of moderation. We have always gone against the aspect of taking law into your own hands. We are very worried with regard to any aspect of extrajudicial killings.
Now, does it worry you that this is spreading among the Muslim youth in South Africa? I mean, in our show, we've been talking to some of these youth who say they are actually sympathetic to these groups.
As I've said, youth have always been part and parcel.
But is it worrying you? Is it a worry that we could get South African youth actually going to join these groups?
It is an aspect of worry, but it's also an evolution and part of society that we have to take into account. Sociologically, you look at society as a whole, you'll find that youth have always been in that way. Yes, it does worry us, but at the same time, we also need to look at the broader issues and the reasons why these youth are attracted to such groups. But yes, whatever needs to be done in terms of abiding by the law, yes, we as people who are from the imams would be addressing that and have addressed it.
Maybe your comments on the youth, the South African youth, particularly looking at them.
I don't think that there's a big kind of attraction to ISIS in South Africa for various reasons. South African Muslims are not the same as European Muslims. There isn't the same kind of sense of alienation. There's a very definite sense of belonging of South African Muslims in South Africa. And South African Muslims in this country of whatever class, race, or whatever you might like to say, don't feel from their compatriots a sense of otherness.
But globally, okay, moving away from South Africa, if we look at other continents such as Europe, we've seen a pull coming from there. Isn't that worrying?
No, it's worrying, and even if there's 5 South Africans that are attracted to ISIS, I think it should be worrying for the Muslim community, and I think that the Muslim community here, it's their problem, they need to deal with it. Yes, it's a security problem, but if you talk about root causes, then you need to deal with why those young people are feeling that way. In Europe, I think that it's very worrying, the number, hundreds or thousands across Europe. And again, why do Muslim youth, in particular in European countries, feel that kind of alienation? Why do they not feel a sense that they are actually French or they are British, as South African Muslim youth feel that they are South African?
So where have they got it wrong when we talk about the Western governments? Maybe you can come in there.
Well, I see, firstly, I think people who have taken these places as their adoptive countries, they see the hypocritical policies of the adopted countries over their ancestral lands, and they're seeing it on a daily basis. So that creates an aspect. Another aspect has been the marginalization and the ghettoization of the Muslim youth. They live in places where they are marginalized, they're not regarded as part and parcel of the society, and this is a fertile ground for extremism to breed. So you'll find that they never find themselves in terms of an identity. They see the double standards that is out there from the adopted countries towards the ancestral lands. And of course, that is part of the problem.
You mentioned the role of the community here, and I'll also throw in the role of religious leaders. Are they doing enough, and what else can they do?
Well, religious leaders hopefully are part of the community. Sorry. I think that religious leaders, and not just clergy, but religious leaders in general, an important aspect is that they must take principled positions on everything. And that is that they don't play to those who are in power, which is often a problem. But let me also say that what Maulana said, a good example is Egypt. You had an uprising that took place, you had a democratic process, a democratic government that came into power, called itself Islamist, a party that eschews violence, and then was put down in a violent coup in which thousands of its people were massacred. The result of that is that while that particular group, I think they're very foolish, maintains their non-violent position, that you have sprouted up all over the place organizations who believe that the only way forward, and from Muslim Brotherhood itself, breakaway youth groups that feel that, we tried it, we tried democracy. Whenever we do, we get put down. The only way now is to take up the gun. And so the violence that you're seeing in Egypt is going to go on for years, if not decades, because of that. And what Maulana is saying is that if you continue to have European powers and the United States, etc., supporting autocratic and dictatorial governments, then you're going to have to face the violent response that comes with it, unfortunately.
Gentlemen, we'll have to end the conversation here. Thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa 360. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Africa 360. We'd like to hear your views. Tweet us your views at A360_ENCA or join the debate by going to our Facebook page. You can send us an email to africa360@enca.com. So until next time, it's goodbye for now. Thanks for watching.